We're live.
Well, press record here as well, so we have the same time.
And the center is to the right. Yes. You can copy it, that's fine.
Check, check, Roberto. Hopefully you should hear this coming through. Are you hearing me?
Noi siamo online, ok. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Digital Delights and Disturbances. My name is Donatella Della Ratta. I am an Associate Professor of Communications and Media Studies here at John Cabot University with the Communications and Media Studies Department. And today I'm very proud to present the third lecture of our Fall 23 cycle of Digital Delights and Disturbances, which is called The Fear of the Wrong Image, the New Politics of Evidence. And I'm very happy that tonight we're gonna hear from very young, inspiring artists. I have to say, though, that one of them, Anna Engelhardt, couldn't be here because she's Russian. She lives in the UK, and she wasn't given a visa to come to the European Union, sadly. And Mark is going to explain why he's wearing a mask. But yeah, so Mark and Anna work together, are an amazingly inspiring duo of artists and researchers. They both work on infrastructural horror, and you will hear more about this because, I mean, it's a very inspiring topic and very new as well. And their talk is going to raise questions about the value of the so-called image evidence in the age of synthetic images, which is a topic very dear to us here at the Communications and Media Studies Department. So Anna and Engelhardt and Mark Cinkevich are both aliases of two young artists, researchers and writers, and Anna's practice examines post-Soviet cyberspace through a decolonial lens, and she has been talking and exhibiting her work in major European festivals such as Transmediale, Ars Electronica. And Mark is also now at University of Warsaw, is exploring the politics of the synthetic image for his PhD in anthropology. Yeah, and that's it. And I want to leave the floor to Mark. As usual, we will have a Q&A after the talk. Thank you, Mark, for being with us.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here and to share our research with you. And a quick disclaimer about my mask. So unfortunately, I'm from Belarus. Some of my family members and my friends are under political repressions. So me talking with my face about military bases and stuff like that might have consequences for them that are beyond my control. So I just cannot take this responsibility on myself. So I have to wear a piece of fabric on my face, but it's here, so now nothing is stopping us from having a conversation about synthetic image. And today when we talk about synthetic media, generated imagery, the biggest concern that we hear is that, which is being debated, is that an image might lose its value as evidence. This is indeed a scary perspective because we usually want to trust what we see. So today, by tracing the production of the image from military simulations to technical interfaces, we will try to identify what is precisely at stake with synthetic image. So we are going to reflect on the political agency of the image as evidence, and in particular, we will look into different visual regimes of Russian war crimes that exist on social media, starting from the occupation of Crimea in 2014. And we'll try to conceptualize the shifting role of evidence in its synthetic double. We will begin by a short piece by Anna, which will be more like theoretical, and then the second part, it will be me talking about how particularly we navigate these Russian regimes of the visuality. So without further ado, let's proceed.
Recent debates on the dangers of AI-generated images, or so-called synthetic media, are gripped by the fear that an image might lose its evidential value as a representation of real events. Investigative journalists and researchers are used to the demand that photos and videos of atrocities must remain verifiable and traceable to their source, even as they break the news, go viral, and fall through the cracks of NDAs. But while some images have had to be smuggled out of conflict zones, others must be carefully reconstructed, composited, or even generated out of pixels alone. My research traces the production of images from military simulations to technical interfaces in order to ask if we can begin to identify the political order produced by such synthetic images. A blurry video is gaining traction on Facebook. One by one, military vehicles are targeted and destroyed as a convoy passes through a dark road. While users are cheering the explosions of what they believe to be NATO forces in Ukraine, the unmistakably low fidelity of the 3D graphics makes me question whether the comments themselves are authentic. How can anybody trust the veracity of the footage in which the vehicles cast no shadows over two-dimensional grass? This and other screen grabs from the video game Arma 3, produced in 2013, go viral again and again, framed as real-life war footage. In 2018, Turkey used the game to generate misinformation and its assault on Afrin in Syria. In 2022, once again, pro-Russian accounts faked Russia's advances in Ukraine using Arma 3. According to a PR manager of Arma 3 developer, these videos were used to spread misinformation about military operations in Afghanistan, Palestine, and even along the border zone between India and Pakistan. In a statement released to address the issue, the company referred to the specific popularity of the game as flattering, as speculating that it stems from the realism of the 3D environments in the game. I wonder if the low polygonal models from 2013 are the real reason, though. Despite the claim, the ability of the game to simulate rain, I quote, seems an unlikely benchmark of the realism of 3D graphics in 2022. There is another reason not mentioned in these interviews. The mechanics of the entire Arma series is repurposed from an existing product, a military simulation called Virtual Battle Space, used by the US Army, the UK Ministry of Defense, and other armies of the global north. The core of Virtual Battle Space, from weapon interfaces to game characters, is modeled on tactical military documents, including United States Army field manuals. Originally produced as a tool of war, it is no wonder that the simulation repeatedly re-enters the battle space without any friction. It never truly left it in the first place. If you try to assess the authenticity of images from Arma 3, you will become trapped in an endless loop between misinformation and fact. The only way to escape this cycle is to approach the critical analysis of the game and the footage that it has generated from what it actually is, namely a simulation. As political scientist Antoine Bosquet notes, one meaning of a simulation I quote, invokes the notion of surface resemblance. A simulation is something that appears to be what in fact it is not, end quote. Today, the idea of a simulation as an empty copy of reality, popularized by philosopher Jean Baudrillard more than 40 years ago, runs short of explaining the feedback loop between military operations on the ground and their simulations. This older conception of simulation must be augmented by one that refers to the, I quote from Basque again, dynamic representation of processes, operations, and situations, capturing in some depth whatever is being simulated, rather than simply its surface, end quote. To achieve this complexity and depth, a simulation replicates the key characteristics of the system. These core qualities are determined by their importance for the system's operation, rather than by surface resemblance. Such a difference between the two meanings of a simulation, a surface and a core process, is apparent in fighters' jet head-up displays, HUDs. The planes today are so fast that pilots might be presented only with the, I quote, simplified terrain and mission targets, whereas all other parts of their reality must be, I quote again, stripped out from the pilot's view, as details would be a source of confusion and distraction. In this example, the simulation is so-called realer, more real, than the reality upon which it is privately modeled, as Basque notes. This is not to say that the simulated image becomes more authentic, but rather that it becomes more tactically useful than the real one. The fact that a synthetic image can be more relevant than the real one makes me question the fear of its so-called growing threat as fully legitimate. Such threat presents a growing distrust of evidentiary image assumed to have a pivotal role in politics. The fear of fake images implies an immense agency that evidentiary image possesses, one we should be scared of losing. How can we know that its use value is not merely consigned to representation? How can we know that its use value, the use value of evidentiary image, is not merely consigned to representation in the hopes of inducing action or a humanitarian response? Maybe we're scared of the wrong image. It is commonplace to assume that documentary images can work as evidence of injustice and, therefore, have potential agency to change the course of politics. This expectation that images can effect change has eroded over the years. Often, photographs of people who have been killed go viral under the pretext that, I quote, decolonization and political change would happen through displaying horrific things empires have done. In 2022, for instance, Kader Atiyeh, curator of Berlin Biennale, stated that, I quote, the photos that he refers to is of Iraqi torture and sexual abuse victims must be seen for political change to take place, end quote. As his opponent, Sahakian, rightfully responded, we can be confident that the imagined political change will not follow these photos because even at the height of their circulation, I quote, there were no consequences, political or otherwise, end quote. One can also refer to the case of Alan Kurdi, born Alan Shanu, the boy fleeing Syria who drowned after being rejected for asylum by Canada in 2015. While many media outlets reported on the immense influence that the image had on Canadian politics, none of its migration laws and policies changed as a consequence. Alan Kurdi's family was still not allowed into Canada. In the words of Fatima Al-Abed, commenting on the viral photos of her daughter's everyday life during the Russia-Assad assault on the Syrian population, apart from spreading the suffering of the people, the action is little. Does the problem lie in how media frames these documentary images, the promise of intervention that this circulation holds out, or, as Thomas Keenan has argued, and our misplaced belief in the operative role of the public sphere as the space of political debate. The distinction made between evidentiary and synthetic images is helpful in beginning to answer this question. While photojournalists criticize Amnesty International for using AI to generate a backdrop for their report on police violence, their own non-generated photographs of arrested protesters are praised for their ability to document violence for others to witness. I quote here an article by Zoe Samudzi. If the argument is that witnessing this violence is enough or is necessary to galvanize action, my single question is when. When will these acts become too unacceptable to simply continue to watch? End quote. When is a core term to consider here. By definition, the political agency of the documentary image is tied to its injunction to act in the aftermath of an event. But this implies that it is already too late by the time the image is produced. Consequently, the evidentiary image must have a direct material and temporal bond with an event of violence. This quality is what separates it from the synthetic image. When the role of an image is reduced to a representation of violence that has already occurred, such an image, regardless of how nuanced, doesn't have the agency to lead to, I quote again from Zoe, structural, that is to say, punitive justice. End quote. Does the synthetic image have the capacity to intercede before the event? In order to understand this temporal distinction, one should consider the tactical use of the synthetic image, its relationship with action. The spectrogram of a radio receiver above depicts an encrypted communication between Russian militaries on the ground. The exchange is rendered inaudible, interrupted by noise. The green-yellow dust in the spectrogram is produced by various JPEG images such as signs, skulls, radioactive symbols, and memes when they are converted into sound in order to muffle the communication between troops coordinating military actions. The resulting audio noise is then broadcasted on the radio frequency on which the militaries have been communicating, saturating the chatter with visual data, or what Harun Farokhi coined operational images. Operational images are, in Farokhi's words, pictures that are part of an operation, implying the primacy of action and function instead of a picture to be seen and interpreted for meaning. Operational image, instead of presenting itself for passive observation, as UC Parika notes, is tightly coupled with action, immediate or delayed. Likewise, when someone superimposes the game over a military transmission, to confuse and interfere with the shooting on the ground, we cannot understand such an image without the action to which it is bound. The reference to the game only gains its meaning when the user utilizes the image to enter the battle space virtually, not having to put their own life at stake while engaging in combat. How such an image is defined through action brings me back to the logic of assimilation. The goal of assimilation is to represent the core elements of the system in order to make those elements actionable. Recalling the fighter jet example, the select elements of terrain depicted to the pilot transform space into an actionable environment. Simulation, therefore, can be understood as the production of an information environment that can be operationalized, i.e. made actionable, in different ways. One way to operationalize such information environment is to resort to actions that have immediate and direct impact on the situation on the ground, for instance, by disturbing the radio landscape with image noise. Another is to operationalize information environment, i.e. create a simulation with the aim of a delayed effect. For instance, acquiring new skills such as weapon handling or team coordination. The latter type, i.e. the delayed operationalization of information environment, creates for the viewer a visual order in which the viewer, the image, and the action form a closely connected system within a simulation. This system, radically different from passive witnessing of violence, interests me the most. Recognition models are an early example of such simulations. First introduced as 2D silhouettes of enemy planes in the First World War, recognition models evolved into 3D maquettes to more accurately train the eye of civilians and soldiers to tell friends from enemies during Second World War. These were considered an essential element of defense, critical to the war effort. Today, models are much larger, encompassing an entire building, site, or city. With little risk or expense, one can use this form of simulation to memorize escape routes from a hostile environment and attain intuitive reaction to navigate them. Extended further, the simulated landscapes can integrate open-source intelligence, including satellite imagery, elevation data, and architectural reports to form a base for CGI reconstruction. Similar method was used as a starting point for the video Onset, which I made with Mark Cinkevich in 2023. The film explores recent Russian invasions by looking into the life cycle of one of their core elements, the ubiquitous military base. An unsettling CGI environment was reconstructed from satellite images of Russian air bases, Khmimim in Syria, Baranovich in Belarus, and Bilbek in Ukraine. By following how their initial development leads to the later devastation of the wider sovereign state, the film introduces a parasitic point of view, one that extracts energy to destroy the countries from within. It delves into the power grid of the military, an intensive consumer of energy, and presents terror as an energy-intensive state. The act of producing the film replicates the process of constructing a simulation. During research, Mark and I traced the energy sources that feed the Russian military that are classified due to their pivotal role in the invasions. We relied on open-source intelligence tools, calculating the energy consumption via data gleaned from civilian airports, cross-referencing spike and generation consumption, and by geolocating anomalies to sketch out the exact outline and coordinates for the simulation. We then reconstructed the digital environment of the electricity substations in collaboration with CGI artist Eduard Morochabayas. The resulting simulation locates the viewer within an environment where the link between these energy sources and the violence it enables is not just explained and spelled out, but is operationalized. In short, it represents the core elements of the system to make them actionable. Such visual order defies the fear that follows synthetic media. It bypasses widespread antagonistic framing between the politics of authentic and generated image. Its synthetic images are not at odds with satellite imagery, photographs, and footage from the ground. Defying concerns, they are bound in a symbolic relationship, relationship linked to form an interconnected system. Still, as many skeptics warned, the perceived importance of evidentiary image is indeed in decline. Its feared distrust becomes real since its value does not reside anymore in the evidentiary quality alone. The organizing principle shifts from purely indexical to operational. Indexical image does not suffice as a means to an end. To gain political significance, it must be tied to an action. It must be operationalized as a part of a larger system. The crisis, therefore, is not one of disbelief in the evidentiary image itself, but of disillusionment in its effect on politics. Its indexical link with a physical reality, recalibrated within a simulation, is utilized anew.
It is normal, instinctive to be terrified of demons. But do you know why they're dangerous?
Can we have the light back on? Thank you. So in our work, as you see, we engage precisely with the synthetic environments, with this type of simulations as the one shown. So reconstructed from satellite images, we created these simulated spaces of Russian air bases in Khmimim, Syria, Baranovichi, in Belarus, and Belbek in Ukraine, which are one-to-one copy of actual bases. And then in Onset, in film, we craft a specific alliance of investigative research, CGI animation, and even medieval demonology to uncover precisely what is invisible about these military installments. And over the course of the film, the true horror resurfaces where Russia's wars materialize as sort of parasitic monster that possesses sovereign states from within. And military bases often create an image of these modern-day forts, these castles, high-tech architectural projects that are specifically designed to serve the army. However, the reality of military bases is much more complex, and rather than being purpose-built, they are often converted from civilian airports and civilian buildings taken over by Russian soldiers. One might say that they are hunted by them Russians appearing as unannounced specters. Russian troops aim to invisibly transform an airport into a full-fledged airbase. While preserving the facade of the structure, they corrupt its internal order. Remarkably, Russia consistently denies creating its airbases. This denial functions as a cloaking strategy that is employed to blur the lines of the invasion. This tactic manifests in distinct but very consistent ways. In 2020, the Russian military appeared at the Belarusian Baranovichi air base, and they have maintained their presence there since. And this air base was never admitted to be taken over by Russia, and instead it was concealed as a military training center. Russia has been deploying jets, helicopters to the base under the guise of training purposes. And while the conversion was a sign of Russian support for Lukashenko's regime during the nationwide protests. In 2015, Russia remained discreet regarding the establishment of an airbase in Syria. That year also saw the arrival of numbers of Russian soldiers to the Bashar al-Assad International Airport in Syria, a presence that the Russian government denied. Contrasting with arrangements in Belarus, the Russian base in Syria received legal status in 2017 through a lease agreement for 49 years with a clause for automatic extension. The establishment of Khmimim military base in Syria can be seen as a gesture of gratitude to the Assad regime, acknowledging Russia's significant role in supplying about 85% of arms import during the Syrian revolution. Just a sec. A similar tactic was used by Russia during the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Ukrainian Sevastopol International Airport was taken over by Russian men in plain clothes with faces concealed by balaclavas, actually. This form of invasion embodies a specific evil of silent interception, a form of possession, as you name it. First, Russian troops make their way inside the country, completely unannounced. They hide their markings, they destroy any evidence of their presence, and they create this unexplainable, almost like paranormal interference. The deceptive logic goes, you cannot fight a mysterious force with guns, and you will not realize that the opposite is true until it's too late. And while unarmed Ukrainian soldiers were ready to resist, they were singing, they were marching against heavily armed Russian soldiers, they lacked the very means to fight. And the cruelty of this invisible occupation aims to deplete Ukrainian resistance of weapons, of military logistics, of organized response from the Ukrainian state as such. explicit confrontation would have been not less difficult, but more straightforward, more easy to perceive. In this case, Russian tactic runs deeper than the destruction of footage, destruction of evidence, or organized action. Such tactics comes handy for manipulating the mental state of the people who want to resist. When Russian forces took over Sevastopol International Airport in Crimea, many Ukrainians were shocked by a significant number of their soldiers that were stationed in Crimea actually switched alliances and joined Russia. It was never because those under occupation are weak or anything, but because Russian officers were actually looking to talk to the Ukrainian soldiers. They approached them one by one, lying to them that the Ukrainian government sees that you gave up, they will imprison you, they will initiate criminal cases against you, you will go to under tribunal. And then after this threat, they exchanged them with false promises that if you join Russia, there will be high salary, because many people were actually living in Crimea. There were promises of housing, that they could stay, that they could retain their normal life, basically. So Russians were behaving like demons, but not in this Catholic, grandiose sense of a devil, but more as a in the Russian word bes or chort. Bes is this minor like Satan, known to enjoy violence of any scale. In this case, from throwing rocks to the engines of the jet, to kidnapping people, torturing people. In these conditions, Ukrainian soldiers were far from deliberate traitors with malicious intent. They changed the alliance, their change of alliance is more similar to possession. In fact, possession bears many similarities to the Russian military tactic at large. Russian colonial specters hunt countries that successfully seek democratic change and independence. To Russia, such change is perceived as a vulnerability, an opening to infiltrate the body of the nation, much like an evil spirit seeking to infest a host. Once appearing, the colonial spirit of the Russian army aims to spread and take possession of the entire country, but from within. The possession here is not merely a metaphor, but is starkly literal. Infiltrating the sovereign body of the state, it begins to hollow and destroy it from within. Russian invading forces penetrate the border of the subject. They inhabit a body without a permission, compelling it to act against its own will and navigate around material borders with a volatility that subverts the very demarcation of the self. In this way, invading forces, like spectral entities, have the capacity to fracture ego of the nation, challenging its sense of unified identity and self-control. In this haunting strategy, Russia, with its spectral military tactic, does not merely occupy territory, it possesses it. It insinuates its control deep into the social and political body, and like demon that knows no boundaries, begins its government. A military base is not merely a concentration of soldiers. It is an intricate blend of infrastructure and manpower. While a collection of soldiers without infrastructure is just a military camp, it is the presence of these soldiers that transforms a regular civilian facility into a military one, defining its affiliation. A stark example of this was witnessed in 2015 when Russia repurposed Bashar al-Assad International Airport into a military airbase. In September of that year, Russia transported fighter jets, attack and assault helicopters, and initiated extensions of existing infrastructure. They ramped airport, boasted air-conditioned logistical containers, providing accommodation for thousands of soldiers, a new air traffic control tower. They extended the runway. They created additional storages and spaces, field kitchen, refueling stations. However, Russia's narrative surrounding the establishment of the airbase in Khmimim is riddled with denials and obfuscations. Initially, in 2015, the takeover of the airport by Russian military was denied, but as evidence of their deepening involvement became undeniable, somehow skewed narrative was presented. The Russian military often paints a picture of simply having driven a stake in the middle of a field, citation, that they just create something out of nothing in an empty field. This is how they describe establishing the base. They conveniently ignore or downplay the existence of Bashar al-Assad International Airport. And when referenced, it's frequently described as an abandoned or dysfunctional facility in 2015, contrary to the truth, that it was just an operating airport. The skewed portrayal conveniently allows Russia to argue that the airbase, through civilian in nature, is insulated, nestled with protective kind of dome where any intruder to the territory of airbase would be eradicated. This narrative starkly contrasts the reality that the base is actually situated almost in the city, in close proximity to several non-militarized urban areas. And these blurred boundaries between the military and the civilian spheres compromise the base autonomy, rendering such dependence on civilian infrastructure a taboo. Energy reliance, in particular, is the biggest secret. One military expert that we consulted when we asked about the dependency of military infrastructure on civilian energy and civilian infrastructure, he just admitted that it's an interesting aspect he never actually considered. In Russian parlance, there exists a phrase, to eat a holy spirit, implying consuming nothing. This aptly mirrors the obfuscation surrounding electricity consumption. While there are mentions of bases relying on diesel and gasoline generators, what you'll find if you look for what energy bases use, the fact that these are merely stopgaps that cover for civilian power interruptions. The publications discussing military electricity always project sort of like futuristic views, discussing transition to autonomous energy, solar panels, while they omit the present-day full-scale reliance on civilian infrastructure. While exact figures for Russia remain elusive, it's noteworthy that the US Department of Defense stands as one of the world's foremost energy consumers. The Khmeimim military base, flaunted in Russian propaganda, exemplifies this nation's high-tech military powers. To make it the single most well-known Russian military base inside Russia, numerous reportages have been bragging about how advanced everything at the base, yet the origins of electricity fueling this state-of-art base is never broached. The fact that airport, before its militarization, was reliant on civilian power grid still remains, and it still remains tethered, is considered classified, actually, military classified. Such dependency should be not in isolation, but in tandem with the deliberate devastation of civilian infrastructure. This symbiotic relationship reveals a deep-seated malevolence. Notorious double-tap strikes, where Russia forces patiently wait for the rescuers after the first strike to come before launching a second assault, they just epitomize this brutality. Their plan for civilian infrastructure, charting a course of systematic obliteration, whether school, hospitals, or power grids, reveal an intent to cripple a nation. Yet, amidst this chaos, their own establishments, the military bases, always remain untouched. For instance, as Syria grappled with blackouts and the electrical infrastructure was destroyed, owing largely to Russian bombardments, the Jableh electrical substation, that is the closest to the Russian airbase, has always been not only working, but continuously renovating. Its capacity for energy transmission skyrocketed. It increased 1,000 times, even as countless Syrian regions were in complete darkness. Simultaneously, all other Russian electricity projects in Syria were never realized. They kept illuminated only the military bases. Russian troops are well aware that electricity means power to colonize, without which Syrian civilians in this case would be left vulnerable to the attacks. This formula was coldly articulated by a Russian military pilot in Syria. He who was witnessed his fellow servicemen bombarding electricity infrastructures. If not bombed the power grid himself, he observed, it's easy to say where I should fly and to drop bombs during the night. Where there is light, there is peace. Where there is no light, there are terrorists. In a manner that mirrors this visceral and consuming relationship of demonic possession, Russia's takeover of Belarusian airbase, particularly the Baranovich airbase, reflects a form of this form of control. Just as a demon, once embedded within the host, draws its energy to sustain it, so does Russian presence within the Belarusian infrastructure. It enacts a very comparable dynamic. Here, the lifeblood is not of supernatural order, it is electricity, the nervous system of a nation state, of a modern nation state. Pulls in through the substations, through wires. It animates both the mundane and the extraordinary, this aspect of contemporary life, including military. Electricity is not just utility, it is a means of wielding control and projecting power. The missiles that launch from the Baranovich airbase, the jets that are repaired in the aviation plant at the Baranovich airbase, they require high volume flows of electricity. And this is also illustrated by the extensive renovations that happen at the electricity substations that supply these military bases and the aviation repair plant. In 2020, the Baranovich substation was upgraded with sophisticated protection system against explosions and fires, and this advanced monitoring clearly reflected the strategic value of the substation. This was no mere infrastructural update, it was an amplification of the military's grip. Simultaneously, Russia's engagement with the broader Belarusian electrical infrastructure has been marked by a more disruptive approach. Reports of new Russian-controlled mega infrastructures that come at the expense of systematic freezing and destruction of already existing infrastructure in the Belarusian power grid. They create this picture of a force that is not just occupying, but is actively consuming its host. While the substations that supply the air bases are getting renewed every year to make up for the growing energy consumption of the Russian military, the Belarusian energy production is scaled down, on the other hand, to make space for the Russian-sponsored energy projects like nuclear power plant in Ostrovets. And Russia obtained control over Belarus to the extent of enmeshing itself into the Belarusian power grid. The initial takeover focused largely on securing control over energy pipelines and courts. It set the stage for the subsequent military occupation. Because to command a country's energy, in many ways, to hold its destiny. The military occupation then is nothing but a logical continuation of the energy-focused occupation. In this context, possession is more than mere control. It is a form of autocannibalism, of consuming from within, where the parasite does not merely subjugate the host, but reshapes it, repurposes it, and in some ways devours it. The assumed autonomy of the Baranovich airbase in this slide is a very stark illustration of the depths of this possession. It stands as a material manifestation of how energy infrastructure in the hands of dominating power can become a weapon and a form of binding an umbilical cord that nourishes the occupier while slowly draining the life force from the occupied. At the end of the film, the narrator, at the end of the film Onset that we did with Anna Engelhardt, the narrator asks, in relation to the process of how Russia obtained control and created its military bases over territory in almost unnoticeable way, like evading representation, the narrator asks, do you remember the onset of possession? It's hardly possible to capture it all in one image, because there are too many instances, events, and occupations that hunt your mind down. Yet, through the blur, comes the certainty that you can name it, and you can call it by its true name. The airbase becomes the striking symbol of this form of possession. It operates under the image of autonomy, under the guise of self-contained, self-sustained military installation. Yet this autonomy is an illusion. The military base is tied to the substation, to the transmission line, to the energy-producing enterprise, etc. The specifics of electricity as a resource, its volatility, its need for high-voltage transmission infrastructure, its resistance to long-distance transport without significant energy loss mandate, closeness proximity between the parasite, the occupying force, and the occupied. And this proximity makes these highly secretive military substations exposed. So while there is always a military base, there's always a substation that feeds it with energy, and this is precisely what is getting exposed in the film. And using open source intelligence tools like Google Earth Pro, one can actually oneself locate these substations near military bases because they're always so close. And mapping these locations is to map the vulnerability of the Russian occupation. And this is precisely how the synthetic image, which is like so feared, can be operationalized and can be, in fact, more useful than any other type of image. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark and Anna, of course, for such an inspiring and rich, theoretically speaking, also talk. I want to raise, also thank you for underlining the role of electricity in terms of colonizing countries. And I very much appreciated, I lived in Syria for a long time, and I very much appreciated you touched upon the links between Russia and Syria, also in terms of, military bases and dependence from the electricity system. But I would like to ask you just one question, because I want to open it to the floor. Can you talk a little bit more about OSINT, so open source intelligence, and all the techniques that you have briefly mentioned now, in connection to demonology, because I think this is one of the most fascinating points that you touched upon, and I know that you're doing also a PhD in anthropology. So I would like you to expand also on demonology when it comes to local folklore, because I don't think we know enough about the local folklores, and it's a very fascinating connection.
This idea of demonic possession that we use, it's quite literal in that sense, because like when a spirit possesses a body, a spirit can kill the body. So what happens with a person possessed is that a possessed person doesn't control its own body. All the needs of the body are sidelined for the purpose of the spirit sort of just feeding itself. And once the body is exhausted, the spirit can just leave and go elsewhere. So this is precisely what is happening here. While Russia builds its military base somewhere, it's never just a road, though it seems like it's just a road in the field. It's connected to the substation, which fuels the military base. It extends to hundreds of kilometers of energy transmitting enterprises. So it's the same as sort of taking control over the entire nervous system, and then just as a body of a person isn't this like a state of not controlling, person can mumble even something like, where does it come from, what the person says. Here it's absolutely in the same way. Russia only ensures that the energy infrastructure is operative in like sending the energy to the military base, while anything else that is outside that has no military purpose can be bombed, can be destroyed. And the line is very thin precisely because these military installments, like military bases, they are created from civilian infrastructure, so they become absolutely indistinguishable. And once a military base is established, this control over the energy infrastructure is extended all over the country. It's impossible to plug it out. You can't just close a military base and it will go away. It doesn't work like that. It becomes a part of a narrow system of a body in that sense. Yeah, I don't know if it answers your question.
And no, of course, and if you can expand a little bit on your practice using OSINT.
Yeah, OSINT. So the thing is, a lot of information about military bases, it's considered classified, as what I explained, because it is a secret where the energy comes from to the bases. But once you just look into some data that is actually there, you look on the map, you find some documents about the substation renovations, then the picture sort of resurfaces. And the interesting thing about Russian military is that they're quite clumsy with the way they handle information. So consider the example of Baranovich military base and the Baranovich substation. The Baranovich is a city that has the population about 70,000 people. And in comparison to other cities in Belarus, it has the biggest and the most developed electrical substation, which is absolutely cannot be compared to anything even close, like anywhere in the country. And the thing is, it is not just one substation. There has been actually a second substation built because Russia brings more jets from the moment of the invasion of the Ukraine. They bring more jets, so they need more energy. So there are more transformers brought to this substation, and this information is absolutely traceable. When you look at the dynamic of all other substations in Belarus, and when you look at that particular substation in Baranovich, you see that it's been renewed every year, absolutely every year. It's been rebuilt, though it's almost max of its capacity like previous year. And this information, though classified, like you cannot know where the energy comes from to the base, but is absolutely traceable through OSINT. And I'm going to talk more about it tomorrow at the workshop, so those of you who are there, welcome.
Yeah, I wonder if there are questions from the audience. Don't be shy. Okay, I'm gonna keep asking, but I don't wanna, okay, great, because I don't wanna monopolize the conversation, please.
So I have a question about the possible connection between your work and the work of an artist like Trevor Paglen, who has been, after 9/11 and after the CIA extrajudicial abduction, has been actually tracing secret US bases and making visible a lot of these military outposts that are not supposed to be visible. And Trevor Paglen has been doing this through very different kind of images. But I wonder whether you see a connection between the work that Paglen is doing and your work. Also he has been using a lot of information that are seemingly disconnected, but that if you know how to connect, they can actually become a source of information.
To be honest, I didn't know about that person, but yeah, that's very interesting. Another element that you made me just think about is, maybe I can elaborate on that instead because I am not familiar with the work, is the role of simulation in our work. We created these 3D environments with a specific goal of understanding how the thing works. And it used to be that the simulation was understood more as a fake, something very disconnected from the reality. But now we begin to think about simulation as something that represents specific processes that interest us. But what's important that are crystallized processes. But it's important that it's a very pragmatic representation and that is something that can be utilized. So in that sense, we create simulations focusing on specific things, which is electricity transmission in that sense, for the very utility purposes, because once you know how the entire thing works, this is like with the daemon. If you know the best way to control the daemon is to call it by its name. If you know the name of the daemon, you can control it. If you know how the system operates, how the Russian energy infrastructure operates, you sort of know how to resist it more effectively. In the simulation, in comparison to the representational image that Anna was talking about, like we can see violence, okay, people are getting killed, bombardments, okay, we see it, nothing happens. But with the simulation, we go away from this indexical image because indexical image is never about the future. We don't know what's going to happen, just about now. But the simulation allows to actually get a glimpse about what could be done, and this is we believe, a way for tangible resistance, much more tangible, much more realistic than even indexical image.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I was particularly interested in your talk about the visual regimes of the occupation, and you described the Russian occupation as a kind of an invisible, how you said it, invasion, or it's like invisible spirits who doesn't have any marks and they are undistinguishable. It's something that you cannot track, right? And I was thinking about this kind of invisibility of these occupying forces or invading forces, also in connection to their own blindness. Because what I'm speaking about, maybe you read these reports that were published in New York Times and in some other newspapers about the reports about the intercepted phone calls from Russian soldiers to their relatives. And that was a very interesting thing, that those Russian soldiers who took part in the invasion to Ukraine, they didn't have any reliable or any relevant information about where they are operating. They didn't have any updated maps. They had the wrong ideas about the names of the cities that they invaded. They didn't know the real situation. For example, they were told by the commanders that everyone who is on the street is the military because all the civilians left, which was not true, and so on. So they kind of operated in the completely fictional picture. So I don't know what I'm leading to, but I think it's an interesting connection about this invisibility of these kind of spirits, as you said, but also blindness of them, because they somehow didn't know where they are operating, what they are doing, what kind of people they are facing, who are those people. Like they believe that they are Nazis, or all of the people that they encountered are military, whether it's not true, and so on and so on. So for example, they believe that some cities are defeated and the government has left, so they didn't know at all what's happening. So I don't know, maybe that could be an interesting direction to think about this demon figure as the one who's invisible but also in a way blind, or it's kind of someone who possesses, but he's already possessed in a way, and devoid of certain vision or something like that. So it's more to your like demonology metaphors. And so that's kind of a comment. Maybe you would be interested to respond. And my question is very simple, just to clarify for myself. So you are speaking about the simulations as operational images, right? So, so what is the utilitarian purpose of your simulations? Because this is not quite clear for me. So, am I correct? So you are mapping the infrastructures that support Russian military bases. And this mapping that you produce can be used, for example, for destroying these infrastructures, or is this precise?
You said that for me. Yeah, that's precisely it. I don't want to maybe directly say that, but yeah, that's precisely because you can actually pinpoint. You can say this is precisely the substation that fuels this, and Russians are well aware of this. They target Ukrainian infrastructures a lot. As you may know, they destroyed up to 70% of energy infrastructures last winter in Ukraine. But yeah, that's precisely it. And this is some of the tactics that are being used now by various resistance groups, because it's one thing to target a military airbase and another thing to target although quite a huge, but still just a substation, like a set of wires and transformers. But coming back to the initial thing that you said is super interesting, especially the aspect of not knowing geographically maybe where they are. This is super interesting. Yeah, but on the other hand, you know, the invasion of Crimea has been like masks, no identity marks, anything. These were just green men, like as we've heard this meme. And this is one of the things about demons. They try to hide their name from you.
It's
always.
also, maybe you know that when the invasion started, the Ukrainians covered the toponyms. So they covered with paint the names of the cities, so the Russians didn't know where they are. But what is more strange, that their own like commanders didn't give them the correct information. And also they didn't have a phone or smartphones to check where they are. So they kind of operated without any relevant information about the situation and the place, geography, and so on and so on. So it's also, I think it's interesting to think about the agents of these invasions also, you know, and about the agency and.
Sure, I don't want to go too much into the ideology work that is being done on the soldiers and the military, you know, but absolutely, at least like the not known geographically where they are, I think is very good, potentially topic, very interesting. Yeah. Thank you for the comment.
I'm curious as to what you would think about the Wagner group, the mercenaries that were involved a lot in the invasion, and if you believe that Russia used them strictly for the purpose of continuing military power and adding power to their military, or they also used them to maintain that kind of invisibility that you were speaking about throughout the war, and also how they would fit into the idea of the demon possessing.
I would maybe be very careful with answering your question, because there is a very limited like scope of information that I'm 100% sure about, which is like these 3 specific air bases which are operated by the Russian army specifically. So Wagner is a private company which might have its specific like goals, and it works in conjunction with Russian military, but I would be afraid to maybe extend all of the conclusions that I've been making to the private military organizations.
Just a quick question. These simulations, can they be played like a video game or only seen like a film?
That's something we've been thinking about actually, but then we're afraid of gamification of this kind of like spaces. it's a complicated issue. We thought about it, but we decided not to go for the. That would be like a very strange sort of experience, immersing yourself in a military base, going there like a Disneyfication. I don't know, strange. So, now it's just a film, so welcome to watch it.
I was thinking not as like a entertainment, but as like actually simulate sabotage.
Oh. Yeah, that might be actually a good project. Like, how do you blow up a substation, like a VR full type of experience? I don't know. But that's not something we did yet.
I also wonder if you see yourself working, following the path of groups such as forensic architecture, you know, in the way in which you rebuild an environment, use simulation and integrate it with OSINT.
Yeah, we definitely borrow many tactics and instruments from the forensic. We use a lot. We use this a lot, but then we like. The danger is with forensics is that sometimes the picture is too flat, maybe, because if I would present you just with the numbers of the amounts of energy the military base consumes, that would be like very precise numbers from the Baranovici air base, let's say, but that's why it's an artwork actually, so we try to add this demonological thing to actually explain the entire thing, because on the one hand, wait, I lost the track. So yeah, because this possession, it has so many images and so many like events and instances that it's hard to create a specific narrative and like a final idea of it. So for us, it took this a little bit of an extra step to add in the demonology to make this simulation, the film, actually create this narrative of the resistance. So we definitely use a lot of forensics, but we try to add some fiction to the fact to make it full story. Because eventually, if I would just present you the numbers of the megawatts consumed, it wouldn't give the complete picture of what we are trying to convey.
Yeah, I guess maybe you are also speaking to a different audience. I mean, it seems to me that forensic architecture, although it has been glamorized as an organization and now exhibits in fancy venues, festivals, etc., but their main goal in the beginning was to produce evidentiary images that could be brought to court. And it seems to me that you and Anna are more working towards, a different audience, which is, as you mentioned, like...
Yeah, we don't believe in courts, right?
I mean, more maybe like filmmakers, no?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a factual research underpinning the narrative presented, but it definitely has a form of an artwork film.
Thank you. Other questions? So I'll keep going. I think something you said about simulation and the value of the image, synthetic images in a perspective of future images was really something that resonated with me as I witness AI being used in the context of the current war on Gaza. And I saw that an Israeli activist has used, and he's also a filmmaker and somebody who is very fluent with the language of AI, did use an AI generator in order to create videos. I don't know if you have seen it, seen them actually, because there's more than one. But basically what this person did, this media professional did, was to use AI to simulate, and therefore I refer to what you call it the image of the future, to simulate how two of the kids who were kidnapped by Hamas are now living. And they kind of animated the images of the kids talking to an audience or simulating how their life looks like in captivity. So they did use the AI in order to simulate this in the context of the contemporary war. So I wonder, and this is for me a that's the first time I see, AI being used in such a context. Of course, we are talking about things that are unfolding as we speak. But I wonder if you can reflect a little bit on this, because you did mention something connected to the use of simulation as something that triggers, a future scenario, instead of proving something that has already happened, such as the indexical image would do.
This is what, here I'm quoting Anna actually, is that the simulation, because the image as representation, like we have the violence happening on the image, we understand that, okay, we find it unacceptable, but then nothing happens. Instead, this simulation and this sort of like prospect into the future is the way maybe to hijack the violence as it unfolds. And it precisely maybe the work on the temporalities, because again, with the image, it's just indexical, it's just representation, it's always too late to act on this image, while the simulation allows to hijack the violence and find make the image make the image somehow utilized, like so that we can utilize the image. So in that sense.
I think this brings up a lot of also questions in terms of like the epistemology that is created. Like, so what do you believe when you see such images? Because you say, it's a process that activates something. And of course, this way images become operational. But then the problem is the problem of belief. So how do we believe to these things, and what kind of epistemological regimes are activated by this simulation, which I think it's, again, really a brand new problem, which we haven't seen. I mean, as we speak, it's unfolding. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. I just also a small remark about the simulation, simulated images, right? As maybe you're familiar with the research by Anthony Downey. He writes a lot about the simulations and in the military context. So, and there is one like very important concern expressed by him, that these simulated images or like simulated scenarios can, I mean, it's always a speculation also, right? So it's a kind of a prediction, but which is not, it's not a fact. And the thing that these simulations can provoke this preventatory violence that could be unjustified in the end, because when you do something to prevent something, this is a speculative moment, and then it can provoke some violence, like real violence, that is based on something purely speculative, which could have happened but could not have happened also. So this is, because simulation is used very widely in the military conflicts already. It's not like something that we are just thinking about. It's something that is used. And for example, even the drone operators are hitting the target based on the simulation, because they simulate the computer simulates the trajectory of the target, and then based on the simulation you hit the target, and that could lead to the mistakes as well. So this is kind of a very it's a problematic thing. That
I'm not sure what you mean by the preventive thing, because
you kind of you're projecting the action in the future based on your prediction of the future event when you speak about simulation. So you're speaking about something that didn't happen yet but might happen. That's kind of a prognosis, right? Or am I wrong?
No, maybe not quite. The simulation creates a synthetic environment of what is already ongoing. And then it has very pragmatic role of focusing on one specific feature, but which has to be contextualized and be in conjunction with other features to achieve a very specific goal. And in that sense, that goal would be to trace the electricity flow.
I understand. I think that's just maybe different, two different
yes.
modes of simulation, because simulation is also has a lot to do with the future.
Yeah.
And there is also an interesting thing about simulation. I don't remember the name of the place, but I read this news somewhere when the war in Ukraine started. So I read some news that in US they were simulated like environment, but it was built physically for a simulation, for simulating the war in Europe, like Russian-Europe war. So it was like built, how to say it, like props, right? To simulate this possible confrontation between Russia and Europe. So it's also about future prognosis, and the military training was taking place there.
Yeah, but it's very important, you see, that when we talk about a specific case, when we talk about an abstract in general, about some probable scenarios, simulated scenarios, that's one thing. And another thing is that when we create like a synthetic simulation of something already ongoing, and when we talk about very specific case, like for example the Russian air bases here, there, and there, that just changes a little bit when we have like a very specific case. It is different from just an abstract. So we are not trying to like predict any future. We are trying through the simulation to tackle the problem that is right now, like in front of us.
Thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking Mark and Anna for this inspiring talk. Next talk is going to be on November the 30th. Ukraine TV is going to be here. Actually, we're going to do it in Cinema in Trastevere, so stay tuned. Have a good evening. Thank you for coming.